Africa and around the world. It is a real honor to have this opportunity to share across continents. And this morning, we're going to have a series of presentations. We're going to have a series of panelists as well, engaging in a dynamic discussion about the future relationship between the diaspora, the North American diaspora, and the African continent. And to get us started, we're going to ask Melvin Foote, President and CEO of the Constituency for Africa, going.
I'll be a little bit.
Okay, they're coming for you. Good morning. My name is Melvin Foote. I'm the president of the Constituency for Africa in Washington, D.C. So let me say that it's a really delight to be here today. It's a historic day in many regards, because this is the day that the African diaspora in the United States and the African diaspora in Canada have agreed to collaborate. We're looking at events around the world. We're looking at issues in Africa. We're looking at issues of trade, human rights, democracy. And we decided that we're going to collaborate. The best way for us to go forward is to kind of unite our effort and to find ways of collaboration. You know, why are we working in isolation here and we operate an operation in Canada? At least we ought to work together. And so this is the first attempt at our collaboration. We're already plotting all kinds of activity as we go forward in the year. So I'm excited, I'm exceedingly excited to be part of this effort. I think the ancestors are smiling, saying the diaspora must be unified if we're to impact on Africa and if we're to impact on ourselves here in the United States. We're in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement. This is part of it, you know. In order to us to have impact, to improve the quality of life for African people worldwide, we have no other choice but to unify and cooperate. Having said that, let me move forward with the panel. Is Chinny on yet? Okay.
She'll be on in a moment.
Okay, well, let me keep talking to our first panelist get here. Let me say I've been working on Africa for over 40 years. CFA's mission is to educate Americans about Africa, to improve cooperation and coordination among organizations and groups that are working on African issues. And we work to shape United States policies toward Africa. We've been heavily involved in many major initiatives in the United States, including the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, the HIV/AIDS legislation, President Obama's Young African Leaders Initiative, YALI, came from us, and many other initiatives that we were actually successful in pushing the United States government to have a more robust, more dynamic policy toward Africa. So we're a policy organization. We're trying to educate Americans about Africa. We find that Americans are uneducated, undereducated, and miseducated about Africa by and large. So we try to correct that. And then we try to make sure that we have some impact on US-Africa policy. So is Chinny there yet? No?
She's just received a fresh link, so she'll be joining any moment. Thank you.
Perhaps we could ask Dina to say a few words. Dina,
why don't you say a few words?
Well, yeah, thank you very much, Mel. So my name is Dina Epale, and I'd like to introduce myself as Cameroonian by birth, Jamaican by heritage, and Canadian by choice. Well, good morning and welcome to our first gathering for the US-Canada African diaspora, collaborating to transform Africa's future. A lot of people are referring to this time as the new normal. For many of us here today, the term new normal does not adequately address the types of transformation that we envision in the immediate future. We all may come from different locations and have different experiences within North America. However, we are connected by our hopes and desires to see our place of historical origin to be revitalized and recognized for the significant role and impact it has in this world.
Okay.
So please join me in welcoming our esteemed guest speakers and panelists who will share their ideas, reflection, and strategies with us today. So over to you, Mel. I don't know if Chine is on now.
Gareth, I just wanted to let you know that Minister Ducey is listening, but he doesn't have a camera. So I don't know what that means.
All right. If he's able to speak, if his camera isn't working, he's welcome to do so.
Okay. Is Chinny on yet?
We have her listed as on.
Yes, she's there.
Okay.
I see
Janine, why don't you introduce Chinny?
All right. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are around the world. And thank you all for joining us this morning for this important discussion. I'm pleased to be able to introduce to you Ms. Chiney Ogwumike. She's a starting forward with the LA Sparks and vice president of the WNBA Players Association. She was the first overall pick in the 2014 WNBA draft from Stanford University. And she's also a full-time multi-platform ESPN NBA analyst. She's one of the youngest sports studio analysts that we have today, and one of the only full-time professional athletes who also holds that position. Janae is coming to us today as one of our newest board members at the Constituency for Africa. She's a native of Texas. She studied at Stanford under the tutelage of Dr. Condoleezza Rice. And one of the reasons that we have Chiney and we've invited her onto our board is because she's passionate about giving back and empowering the next generation. Chiney has spent 2013 studying abroad in Nigeria, where she was successful in pulling together basketball courts for underprivileged youth. She's made numerous trips to Africa with NBA Africa and other nonprofits to help launch youth engagement initiatives and using basketball in particular as a tool for that. She's traveled to Nigeria, to Rwanda, and a number of other places doing this work. And let's please turn to her now and have some words of inspiration from our next generation.
Thank you so much, Janine. I hope everyone can see and hear me. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Thank you, CFA, my fellow teammates on the board, for allowing me the opportunity to speak. And this theme of transforming Africa's future is truly transforming all of our future, because we all claim a stake in this. I'm so excited to team up with everyone to help push this next generation forward. It will take all of us. And I've realized, especially when it comes to transforming Africa's future, transforming our future, it's not about being competitive in our views with the continent. As Melvin said, it's about being collaborative instead, collaborative with our world. As Janine so nicely mentioned, I'm a basketball player. I've been playing since I was 10 years old. So I've spent more than half of my life hooping. And there are many lessons that I've learned from sports, and now I attribute them to real life. So these are just a few that I've discovered, especially the last few months. What I have realized is that there is a major shift happening where not just athletes, but athletes across different sports, entertainers across different industries, all kinds of backgrounds, we're all coming together as one team, because we are now at the pivotal point where we must seize the day. We cannot be the generation that just post black boxes on Instagram. We must be real about our voices. We must turn activism into action. Now, I know athletes are not typically expected to be at the forefront of social change, but we have discovered that sitting on the sidelines is no longer an option. This is in our DNA. Through sports, in my experience, we are wired to care about the last player on the bench as much as we care about ourselves. We want to win, but most importantly, share that feeling of winning with others. We can't turn this on or off. Trust me, I tried, especially when we leave the court. This is something that translates to all aspects of life. We want to see everyone win. And another thing that I've realized is that the time is now. It's not about using today and just momentum. It's about seizing the moment. And a lot of headlines surrounding social issues have been tied to sports, in my experience. And in my estimation, athletes have been allies on the front lines fighting injustice, because we have realized that there's too much at stake. And it's just not just me, it's everyone like me. I was in school at Stanford University, as Janine mentioned, in the Bay Area when Colin Kaepernick began his peaceful protests with the 49ers. That was when I was at Stanford. And I remember seeing all of the players just react to his choice, knowing that he was right, but also considering how many people told him he was wrong. I was also in the WNBA when Maya Moore announced that she was leaving the WNBA in her prime, mind you, to fight for the wrongfully convicted. I think 22 years after serving time in prison, Jonathan Irons just recently has gone free after a year of Maya Moore's work. And now I am proudly partnering with LeBron James. Never thought I'd be partnering with LeBron James, honestly. I didn't even know he really knew my name. Now I'm on similar Zoom calls like this with Kevin Hart and Killer Mike and a lot of other people, Jalen Rose and a lot of other influencers, because LeBron cares about a vote. But more importantly, he experienced that with his I Promise school. I'm sure everyone has sort of heard of the school he's dedicated to his hometown. He can't just do it by himself. He has to do it as a collective. And that's what I've learned in sports, bringing together as many people together with one message to push that message, because that's how you create meaningful change. And I see so many similarities, especially with CFA. And so now I think, once again, we must, in general, together not choose to just sit on the sidelines when it comes to history. My generation has seen the work that so many countless others have done, and we're trying to, I guess, carry the baton, not to the finish line, but just do our part. We have put ourselves into the game. And this is a concept that's not just us, it's for all of us, all around the world. That's the difference between transforming Africa's future and transforming all of our futures, because that's sort of my existence, that's my identity. The shift is happening now. You see, as a member of this rising generation, a generation that will finally follow through. I always tell people in basketball, if you know basketball, when you shoot, you don't just shoot and hope it goes in. You have to give that shot the best chance. You have to hold your follow through. And finally, our generation is following through, not just posting things on social media. Our generation is choosing to protest. And hopefully that will turn that protest into policy, into a call to action. Now, why is this finally happening, especially amongst the youth in my experience? Well, I think we're finally starting to see things differently and starting to do things differently. We're starting to, like for me, I'm not just a name in a headline after a good game or a bad game, or just a woman on TV sitting next to the guys. I am not defined just by my sports. I am defined by what I can deliver to others that look like me, others that suffer from similar obstacles that I have suffered from based upon gender or even based upon race. So I guess at the core of it all, it comes back to, as I mentioned, my identity. I am proudly Nigerian American. I'm a woman. I'm a sister. I am a nerd. Here are my glasses. I'm not even gonna lie, like they broke a couple nights ago and I had to tape them up. My culture, if you know me, is my motivation. When I go home to Texas, that's when I have a few days off, but I go home to Nigeria to carry on my family's legacy a couple times a year. And that distinction means that I'm not summed up by me walking down the street and you just blanketly assume I am this or I am that. We're no longer labeling. What makes me different is what makes me me, what makes me valuable. And we're starting to see this generation and lean into those differences, no longer excluding ourselves or others based upon common similarities. So to wrap up, to sum up, I think this young generation is finally doing something different, something that we can all take of note and learn from. I know my experiences in sports, but I think this is in general. We are surrounding ourselves with like-minded individuals that no longer accept the status quo. I mean, we are now using our collective platforms and messages to create change. And we are definitely not the first to do it. Clearly, I'm just new to the board and I'm loving all the amazing work that CFA has done. We're not the first to do it, but we will not be the last to do it. I think we have to carry our own responsibilities. But I'm just proud that we are doing it, not just posting on social media. This new generation is fighting against injustice like our predecessors, against racial injustice, economic injustice, injustice that applies to everyone based on the borders and the limitations that our governments have imposed on us, right? Whether it is Black Lives Matter, or even I'm just as passionate against sexual violence against women in Nigeria. Those things, all hate is hate, and so now we are fighting against everything that is wrong, trying to build the world that we would like to be a part of. So finally, we have done our homework, this generation, at least we're doing it. We're currently doing it because we understand that an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We all know that quote, and that is the motivation, that is the inspiration, that is our mission, and I'm glad to bring that energy of the youth, and to hopefully bring some other voices along that can amplify the great global work that CFA is doing. So once again, thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Chinny. That was great. Let LeBron James know that we're looking for him.
Don't worry, I'm still trying to get the cell number. I just got the Zoom link.
Just let him know, we're looking for him. We now have the honor of hearing from the Foreign Minister of Togo, Professor Robert Ducey. Professor Ducey is a scholar. He's a diplomat. He's a friend. Last year he invited me to Lomé to begin the process of an ECOWAS summit that he's planning. He's going to talk about that a little bit more. But I'm deeply honored. I was absolutely overwhelmed with what his vision is and his commitment toward Africa and the diaspora. So I'm really honored to call on Professor Ducey for his remarks. Now, Professor, you have two links. One of your link need to be muted. That's what my people are telling me. So if you registered on two links, we might have an echo. So the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, my brother Melvin, dear friend Julius, distinguished guests. First and foremost, I can't help but commend the non-profit work done by the CFA for the benefits of Africa, and express all our support, our solidarity, and our congratulations to the key officials of your organization, Melvin, who work for the best future of our continent. So you can say your continent too. So indeed, the challenge of transforming Africa is immense, and the African diaspora in all its component and wherever it is located, but must play its part. The African diaspora has an indispensable mission to accomplish in the process of transformation of Africa for us is three reasons. The first one is, and this is reason number one, is the history of the emancipation and evolution of human societies has never been written without the help of the diasporas. So I find it useful to recall here the pioneering and avant-garde role played by the African diaspora across the Atlantic in Africans' march yesterday towards the reconquest of its confiscated freedom and independence through great names such as Richard Wright, William Du Bois, Malcolm X, and the father of our friend Marcus Garvey. So we say the Pan-Africanism ideal was part of the struggles of these major figures of the African-American diaspora. The second reason is for us very simple. The wish to hasten the transformation of the continent requires that we work in synergy and coalition of our forces. The African diaspora, rich in its diversity and its capable human resources, is a significant partner in the march of the continent towards a new horizon. So towards that over Africa, we say the Africa that we want. So united and in good understanding with the diaspora. Africa can become once and for good one of the greatest forces in the world, as said by Kwame Nkrumah, the former president of Ghana. He is, of course, a great figure of the Pan-Africanism and the theory of consciencism. We laid the foundation for the renaissance and transforming of Africa in the 16th. So, and reasons number 3, we think is as transformed and developed African in an opportunity for all those who roots and destiny are linked to Africa. Malcolm X, for example, was right in 1964 at an African Organization Summit in Cairo, when he emphasized in a both a realistic and prospective visionary speech that the development of Africa was a necessary step for the evolution of the cause of Black people around the world. So African problems are African American problems, and African American problems are African problems too, started Malcolm X. So the outrage raised in Africa by the recent death of course, George Floyd is a very good illustration for that statement. Your problem is our problem. Our problem in Africa, we think, is your problem in America or in African American people. So for us, the present generation, our generation, must give Africa the means for its transformation. The future of the continent is not predetermined, but rather to be built, and it's our responsibility. African American who are African because there is an essential part of Africa in terms have a potential. So by playing its part in the continent's transformation process, the African diaspora of North America can help Africa regain its full self-confidence. The evil of Africa is that is much through universal history is often too threatened by those who are only interested in it for their own geostrategic and economic interests. By filling the void, which is conducive to exogenous influences through collaborative and coordinated work, we will succeed in taking control of the continent, our continent destiny. There are undoubtedly in the African American diaspora, numerous qualified. We have a lot of doctors, economics, businessmen, investors, writers, philosophers, computer engineers, in short, valuable human resources that Africa needs in this progress towards the future. And to paraphrase, a line from the national anthem of my country, Togo, I would say, oh, come, you African American diaspora. And let's us build and transform Africa. Is one of part of the Togolese anthem. So finally, I would like to inform everyone that on Togo's initiative, the African Union will soon declare the decade 2030 and the decade of African roots and diaspora. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend, Foreign Minister Robert Ducey. He is really, he's a young guy, as you can see. He's dynamic and very passionate about the things we're talking about today. So I'm excited that he's able to join us. And I want to turn it back over to Adrian Harewood, who's going to introduce the keynote speaker.
Thanks so much, Mel. I thought I would start actually with a bit of a story. So my name is Adrian Harewood, and I live in Ottawa, Canada, and I'm a journalist for CBC, Ottawa. And when I was 6 or 7 years old, in the mid-1970s, living in my hometown of Ottawa, there were three things, or rather four things, that I love more than anything in the world. Pelé, the Afro-Brazilian soccer star, Muhammad Ali, the greatest, the African-American boxer, the Toronto Maple Leafs, the hockey, I'm Canadian, so the Toronto Maple Leafs, I was a hockey fan as well, and fruit. I love fruit, and I still do. Now back then, the world's best fruit store was in my neighborhood, in the west end of Ottawa, Canada. Now anyone who entered the doors of Top Banana on Maryville Road could attest to that. Top Banana lived up to its name. Now to me, the store was heaven. And I can remember entering it on a rainy Saturday afternoon and being in ecstasy. I literally danced through the aisles surrounded by all these mounds of fruit, grapes and cherries and papayas and mangoes, plums, peaches, and kiwi fruit. Kiwi fruit at that time was exotic in the mid-1970s. And in one aisle, I remember seeing this mountain of bright orange, plump, and juicy navel oranges. So I got on my tippy toes and tried to reach one. And then I heard a voice saying, "Put that back." And so I pulled my hand back and looked around, and I didn't see anything. And so I tried once again to reach one of those inviting navel oranges. And again, I heard that voice saying, "Put that back." And so by this time, I'm bewildered. You know, I'm flummoxed. I'm shaken because remember, I'm 6 or 7 years old. And I was in that aisle. I couldn't see anything but fruit, but I heard this voice, and it was like the voice of God in my ear. So I go back on my tippy toes, and I'm about to grasp this divine orange, and I hear this voice saying, "Put that back. We don't buy fruit from South Africa." Put that back. We don't buy fruit from South Africa. Now, the voice was the voice of my father, John Harewood. And at the time, as we all remember, the white supremacist apartheid regime was in power. And thousands of young Black South Africans, some as young as 6 or 7, were protesting in the streets of Soweto against that racist system. Now, some of them were brutalized and killed by the oppressive South African police force because they were fighting for their rights. My parents were educators, but they were also writers and activists. Like many other families in Ottawa's Black community, we boycotted all South African products to express our solidarity with our brothers and sisters who were fighting for their humanity in South Africa. You know, I think my father, in telling me to put the fruit back, was teaching me a lesson that has stuck with me to this day. That despite the fact that I was just 6 or 7 years old and lived thousands of miles away, I had a responsibility to folks who lived on the other side of the world. My dad was teaching me about solidarity, and he was teaching me about family, that my family was also in South Africa. I had my first orange in 1994 when I was nearly 24 years old. And that was the year, of course, of the first democratic non-racial elections in South Africa's history. Now, someone who did more to weave and stitch and bind the global African diaspora together, someone who taught us about the responsibility that we as African people had to each other, and who always reminded us of the importance of self-reliance and being the author of our own story, was the Jamaican-born Black nationalist and Pan-Africanist leader, Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Garvey's vision, the depth of his commitment, his oratorical and organizational skills, his excellence, his unshakable belief, and his pride in his people, Black people the world over, his slogan, "Africa for the Africans," captivated and galvanized millions of people around the world. And despite his pioneering role as a civil rights leader and Pan-Africanist, somehow he remains underappreciated as a world historical figure. Yet his influence is undeniable. He inspired Nelson Mandela and Ella Baker and Ida B. Wells and Jomo Kenyatta and Maya Angelou and Kwame Nkrumah. In a world before the internet, the sheer reach of Garvey's organization, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, was astonishing. Well, someone who knows perhaps more than anyone about the many contributions Marcus Garvey made to the world and has kept his legacy alive over the decades is his son, Dr. Julius Garvey. And we're fortunate to have Dr. Garvey with us today. Dr. Garvey is a board-certified surgeon specializing in the diagnosis and treatment of vascular diseases. He is the founder and medical director of Garvey Vascular Specialists. Dr. Garvey is both nationally and internationally recognized for his contributions to medicine. He's a member of the International College of Angiology, the Phlebiology Society of America, the New York Academy of Sciences, the American Heart Association, the Society of Thoracic Surgeons. Dr. Garvey is also a fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons, the American College of Surgeons, the International College of Surgeons, and the American College of Chest Physicians. I should also mention, I would be remiss if I did not mention, that he's also an alumnus, a fellow alumnus of McGill University. And he went to McGill University in the 1950s. And so it's an absolute delight and an honor for me to welcome Dr. Julius Garvey. Dr. Garvey.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Mr. Harewood. As a fellow McGill graduate, I'm quite astonished, but I'm not altogether surprised at your eloquence and your presentation. All of us McGill graduates have been well schooled. I'd like to thank Milford and CFA, as well as the Africa Trade Desk in Canada, for making this teleforum possible relative to the US and Canadian diaspora and its relationship to Africa, the continent, and its people. It is indeed a pleasure for me to have the opportunity to say a few words. We're still in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. Many of us have lost relatives, loved ones, and friends, and we've all seen the heavy toll on human life and healthcare systems, both here and in the US, as well as abroad. Characteristically, the areas that have done best are those with good leadership, an accessible healthcare system, and where the best scientific evidence has been followed. Concomitant with the necessary lockdown, we are experiencing a global recession that will last at least through 2020, and I think all of us know well into 2021. As Africans in the diaspora, last year we commemorated 400 years since the first enslaved Africans landed at Jamestown, Virginia, as emblematic of the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade in 1619. We have recently witnessed the public murder of George Floyd, an African-American, by a white police officer in the most callous way possible, with his fellow officers looking on and keeping the surrounding onlookers at a distance. This brought to mind, as did social media since then, all the many murders, assassination, rapes, and inhumane atrocities that have been perpetrated by white people against Africans. This is a lot to process through our consciousness, and most of us are still in the middle of this process. However, I think it's fair to say at this point, most of us know that if, as African people, we don't unite and care for ourselves, no one else will. 100 years ago, Marcus Garvey had the first international convention of the Negro peoples of the world, here in the United States in New York City. In 1957, Kwame Nkrumah said, "Africa must unite. Africans must unite." The African diaspora has been considered as the 6th sub-region of Africa by the African Union. As such, it is part of our responsibility to respond to the development needs of the continent. I'd like to look at the healthcare system briefly, since we're in the midst of the COVID virus pandemic. If we look at the problem, the healthcare problem in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa has 10% of the world's population and 24% of the world's disease burden, but only 3% of the world's healthcare workers and 1% of the world's health expenditure. 54% of the population lives in absolute poverty, and 50% do not have access to modern health facilities, and 40% no access to safe drinking water and sanitation. The poor are the most exposed to health risks and the least informed about threats to health. The major causes of morbidity are malaria, diarrhea, respiratory tract infections, intestinal worms, HIV/AIDS, anemia, and malnutrition. The poor bear the major brunt of epidemics such as Ebola and COVID-19. If we analyze the system, we'll see that basically they are weak and inappropriate healthcare systems due to, one, most African healthcare systems are hand-me-downs from the colonial era, and care is focused on the privileged elites and urban centers. Two, the IMF and World Bank structural adjustment programs of the 1980s and 90s severely reduced social spending so that debt could be serviced. Also, there is a human resource crisis. A recent World Health Report estimated that sub-Saharan Africa needed at least 2 million more health workers minimally to address the Millennial Development Goals relative to maternal health and child mortality. There is a continued brain drain of professional workers from the continent to greener pastures, and residual workers are concentrated in the urban areas. 75% of the population is rural, hence there are delays in diagnosis and treatment with resulting poor outcomes. A recent assessment by the Center for Global Development noted that 20% of African-born physicians and 10% of African-born nurses are working abroad. Well, let's look at a solution, or possible solutions. Using the Western model of scientific medicine based on doctors, nurses, hospitals, and highly complex technical procedures, Africa will never bridge the gap due to the expensive training and the associated brain drain. A paradigm shift is needed towards prevention, proper nutrition, health education, public health measures, primary care, and early treatment. The Global Health Workforce Alliance suggested scaling up education and training curricula with a focus on community health workers. The World Health Organization recommended training to task to create a cadre of health workers trained in specific skill tasks that do not require a medical degree or an RN. For example, midwives and clinical officers to do cesarean sections, gynecologic and trachoma surgery. If scaling up and task shifting are implemented along with ICT for distance learning, a rapid expansion of the number of community health workers should be produced, as well as an increasing retention in the rural areas. Neglected tropical diseases are the fourth most important communicable disease behind lower respiratory tract infections, HIV/AIDS, and diarrheal diseases in causing death and disability. Women and children are disproportionately burdened. Childhood growth, intellectual development, and resistance to other infections is impaired. Pregnant women are susceptible to anemia, which is a major factor in maternal morbidity and mortality and adverse perinatal outcomes. Prevention chemotherapy of neglected tropical diseases with mass drug administrations can be integrated with maternal health and child health packages and delivered at the community level by community health workers. This integrated disease management would also address HIV, AIDS, and cancer that require long-term management of symptoms and extended surveillance. We can design a system, a project to use innovative learning technology to train health professionals in partnership with the different ministries of health. Buildings can be provided for Health Sciences Center. We can equip this center and provide a curriculum that will graduate health officers and RNs in 4 years out of high school. The curriculum is modular and graduated so that a year one graduate is a community health worker and knows the local diseases, prevention, treatment, nutrition, sanitation, and environmental challenges of the community from which he or she is recruited. Year two would include the basic medical sciences, and a graduate would be competent in maternal and child care, vaccination, and be able to occupy a health clinic post and supervise the community health workers. Year three would differentiate into a laboratory technician, radiology, EKG, ultrasound, OR, blood bank technicians, etc. Year four would have courses to produce health officers in surgery, medicine, pediatrics, midwives, and nurse practitioners to work both in hospitals and be in charge of health clinics. These graduates will function in community and other hospitals under the supervision of MDs. The most up-to-date technologies will be used to facilitate online learning, including video and audio conferencing, sharing documents synchronously and asynchronously, utilizing internet-connected computers, smartphones, and tablets. This will allow for flexible delivery of health and medical training so that more people can be trained and those in remote locations can have access to learning materials. Diaspora doctors and nurses would participate via the internet for teaching, diagnosis, and treatment. This all has to work within an integrated system of care, that is government, NGOs, faith-based groups, etc. And this focuses on the community as the foundation for needs assessment, health planning, and service delivery. On this side of the Atlantic, we need to organize ourselves, obviously, by province in Canada, by state here in the United States, so that we have an African diaspora health initiative that is comprehensive and includes those of us in the North American diaspora. I would like to switch over to another area briefly as I come to a close, and I think it's of extreme importance. And I'd like to start with some quotations from my father. One, a people without a knowledge of their origins, history, and culture is like a tree without roots. Two, history is the landmark by which we are directed into the true course of life. Three, we're living in a civilization that is highly developed, is scientifically arranged, and everything done by those in control is done according to a system with proper arrangement and organization. One such system is propaganda. Propaganda has done more to defeat the good intentions of nations and races than even open warfare. We of the Negro race are suffering from propaganda to destroy our hopes, ambitions, and confidence in self. Four, we must liberate our minds from mental slavery, because whilst others may help to free the body, none but ourselves can free our minds. We have been victims of propaganda for 2,000 years, most recently since the second rise of Europe in the 16th century. Our books have been burned and history rewritten in the 17th and 18th centuries to justify the enslavement of Africans and the world conquest of Europeans. I quote Martin Bernal from his book, Black Athena. If I am right in urging the overthrow of the Aryan model and its replacement by the revised ancient one, it will be necessary not only to rethink the fundamental basis of Western civilization, but also to recognize the penetrations of racism and continental chauvinism into all historiography or philosophy of writing history. The ancient model has no major internal deficiencies in explanatory power. it was overthrown for external reasons. For the 18th and 19th century romantics and racists, it was simply intolerable for Greece, which was seen not merely as the epitome of Europe, but also as its pure child, to have been the result of a mixture of natives and colonizing Africans and Semites. Therefore, the ancient model had to be overthrown and replaced by something more acceptable. So the winners who have perpetrated genocide, theft, and rape have rewritten history and told the story to valorize themselves and dehumanize everyone else. It's the story of white supremacy, the one story that we've all learned in schools, in literature, in movies, in science, in the arts. It is totally pervasive. And so we have mental slavery. The infrastructure of how we communicate at the present time is the internet, smartphones, social media, TV, radio, movies, and the land phone. A quick view of the above shows that these are controlled largely by global companies that are largely not owned by African people. The way this has happened is part of the story of colonialism and neocolonialism with the complicity of local governments. Behind the telephone companies using their long distance revenues to build their own networks, they squelched local competition. And behind this came a tsunami of technological advancement, content, social media, e-commerce, and now fintech, that's financial technology. As late as last year, YouTube, Facebook owned no content. Airbnb owned not one bedroom. Uber never owned a car. Collectively, however, they control billions of assets and set the tone of how we communicate and do business. Facebook now owns Instagram and WhatsApp. Amazon began to buy Facebook ads, becoming the mainstay of how goods are bought online. Then Square, Stripe, PayPal, and now Cash App, all known collectively as financial technology companies, fintech, providing a new medium for transactions. In order to change our perception of ourselves and how others see us, we must write our own story, collaborate, and build permanent ties to create the economic backbone for the future of Africa and Africans at home and abroad. We must create and own the means to develop and publish content using TV, radio, smartphones, internet, websites, social media, and search engine optimization, and fintech to transact commerce. This is the new communication apparatus which we must own in order to be successful now and in the future. Marcus Garvey used his voice and a newspaper to communicate and network with 15 million people in a short 5 years. 100 years ago, he knew that international commerce was conducted via the seas, so he created the Black Star Line Shipping Company. With all of this technology at our disposal, we can build on that legacy and do more in a shorter period of time. Up, you mighty race. You can accomplish what you will. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Garvey. Very incisive and inspiring words. And I was wondering if I could just take a couple of minutes to ask a few questions, pose a few questions to you. And the first question was this: you alluded to the brain drain. You alluded to the fact that there are so many professionals, so many doctors and other folks who are outside of the continent. And members of our listening and viewing audience mentioned the same, this being a kind of an intractable problem. What are some ideas that you have about addressing this matter of the brain drain?
Well, I think like anything else, a catastrophe gives you opportunities. And while we can look at it as a brain drain, it's obviously people who have accomplished a great deal. both in terms of intellect and in terms of their abilities to move forward in terms of their profession, as well as having disposable income. So this is a group of great wealth. And as you know, at the present time, that group is sending remittances, back to the continent itself at a significant rate. I know it's greater than the investment by the usual investment people. So that the African diaspora at the present time is more important economically to the continent than some of this other private investment that is being courted. The point is that this is not recognized and this is not built upon. And it's the same thing with the ability that they have. That was just talking about the money that they have. But it's the same thing with the ability that they have. That needs to be invited back home to participate in the development process. I just outlined to a small degree how it can be done within the healthcare system. But this can be done, all across the many different areas. For example, whether it's, it's agriculture, or it's industry, or it's education, or it's teaching, et cetera, et cetera. The continent itself, the African Union, has to really, really, make a significant, concerted, structured outreach to the diaspora as the sixth region. And we in the diaspora have to understand that we are one diaspora, not just the recent diaspora, but you might say the original diaspora, the sons and daughters of those who were kidnapped. We are one with the recent diaspora. And, we have been detribalized, we have been denationalized. Some of the recent diaspora have been denationalized. I say we because, I think we're all in the same pot. It has not been as extensive as it needs to be, and that's why you might consider that many of the early Pan-Africanists were people who had been detribalized and saw Africa as a continent. The Marcus Garvey and the Du Boises, etc. Africa was a continent, it was home, but subsequently, we are still paying homage to 1884 and 1885, the Berlin Conference. You see, we're still giving them credibility, where we have 54 or 55 nations who are struggling to deal with the problems so that we do not have scale to deal with our problems. And we need scale, we need vision, and we need scale. And we need both the wealth and the intellectual capacity of the diaspora. So that's kind of a short answer.
You've devoted your life to healthcare, and you clearly have a very clear vision about a health agenda that could transform African spaces, wherever they may be. What do you see as being the biggest challenge to implementing this agenda that you have?
Well, the biggest challenge is our mental enslavement by the systems that have been developed over the last at least 400 years. They have been in place. They're deep within the textbooks. All of us, you and I went to McGill. I mean, what we learned is, shall we say, Western traditional medicine. Now, if we look at COVID now, for example, we see that how it expresses itself on the people that it affects most are those who are impoverished, those whose immune systems are depressed, and that's because of nutrition, malnutrition, poor nutrition, obesity, different diseases that are lifestyle diseases and related more to socioeconomic situations. So my point is that Western medicine looks at disease from the point of view of symptoms largely, and treats symptoms. We need to look at disease more in terms of the actual source, and recognize that the human body is really what heals. And we need to look at the immune system and the balance that is needed within the human body in order to take care of disease. And that's what, you know, healthcare should be all about instead of disease treatment. In other words, we need to promote health and we need to prevent disease rather than diagnose disease and treat it. The Western system is diagnosing disease and treating it. And again, part of that is the whole business of one, the agricultural system, to the food system based on the agricultural system, and our diet. I mean, all of this animal protein and fat and so on, it causes these so-called lifestyle diseases. I mean, 70% of the healthcare costs and the diseases that we have at the present time are lifestyle diseases such as high blood pressure, strokes, diabetes, and of course even cancers. That's part of the toxicity of the system in which we live. All of these could be reduced by a plant-based diet. And I'm not saying everybody has to go vegan, but certainly, you know, fish, et cetera, but not meat on the table every single day. I mean, and again, if we know the way the animals are treated, I mean, it's simply horrific. So again, just trying to answer your point, it's very difficult because the agricultural system, a big pharma, and the medical system itself are against a proper realignment of how we understand our healthcare. So, you know, we need to be able to promote what I've just been talking about, in that individuals need to manage their own health from the point of view of diet, from the point of view of lifestyle, from the point of view of managing stress, from the point of view of sleep, from the point of view of exercise. You are in charge of your own health because the body provides all that you need if it's in harmony. And that begins, of course, with a mental process.
Dr. Garvey, let me ask you one final question before we move over to the panel. And I would be remiss if I did not reference your father, Marcus Mosiah Garvey, because he, of course, was a very unique individual, someone who possessed a radical imagination, someone who had this very interesting duality of being both a visionary, but also being very pragmatic. Yeah. He was very, very practical. And I'm wondering if Marcus Mosiah Garvey were alive today, how would he be approaching the challenge of organization? How would he be approaching just some of the kind of problems that you've laid out for us today?
Well, I think he'd be going in a similar direction to what we just talked about. For example, I just mentioned, you know, first of all, if you look back at the 1920s, you know, the teens and the 1920s, the way commerce was handled between nations and between groups was on the seas. I mean, there weren't these airplanes. Cargo went by boats. This was the way commerce was handled. So international commerce between peoples was by boat. So he said, Marcus Garvey said, we as African people have to get ships. We have to get a shipping line so that we can transport each other and we can transport our goods and services from Africa to the Caribbean, to the United States, back, and so on and so forth. That was the means of commerce. Today, we just laid it out. It's the internet, it's the smartphone, it's all of these, you know, modern ways, fintech, radio, TV, and, you know, I want Moses to talk to this. We need our own communications system so that we tell our own stories. Marcus Garvey told our own stories with his newspaper and with his magazines and with his speeches. And we need to tell our own stories with TV and with radio, with social media. And we need that commerce, that e-commerce that we have. We don't necessarily need to buy the boats, although we could get a few planes, but you know, we do have the internet, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's the way he'd be going at the present time.
Well, Dr. Garvey, thank you so much for such a powerful intervention today. We've all been lifted by your words, and thanks so much for your contribution. And I'm going to start with a standing, if I could stand up. Clap,
Thank you so much, Mr. Yearwood. I think that's because I'm a fellow McGill grad. I appreciate that.
That's true. That's true. There's no lie there. There's no lie there.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And that was Dr. Julius Garvey, and we're certainly going to be reflecting on his comments over the next 45 to 50 minutes, the 50 minutes that we have left. Right now, we're going to move on to our panel. We have a dynamic panel for you right now, and I'm going to just briefly introduce our panelists, and then we're going to go from there. So our first panelist is Rashida Peterson, and Rashida is the CEO and founder of the 1847 Philanthropic and a new technology startup, DIA Fund. Ms. Peterson's career has been built on expertise gained from leading major fundraising and development initiatives in Africa, as well as expanding U.S. trade and investment in developing countries. She served as the Vice President for Programs and Business Development at OIC International. This organization carries the legacy of the late, great Reverend Leon H. Sullivan. Ms. Peterson began her career at the U.S. Department of Commerce, where she served as the East Africa Desk Officer within the International Trade Administration. She was formerly the Director of Membership and Marketing for the Corporate Council on Africa, a trade organization devoted to increasing U.S. trade and investment in Africa. Rashida, welcome. Our next panelist is Moses Mawa. Moses is the founder, president, and CEO of Silver Trust Communications, Inc., the 24-hour Afro-Global television channel, and the Transformation Institute for Leadership and Innovation, which undertakes the Transformation Awards, crossover mentorship program for youth to achieve their full potential, and other initiatives. Moses is a prolific film and television executive producer. He's published over 20 magazine titles. And in 2016, Moses launched Afro Global Television, a 24-hour global super channel that informs, empowers, uplifts, and entertains with exceptional programming focused on Africa and the diaspora. Moses, welcome.
Thank you.
Susan Namulindwa is the co-founder and executive director of the Africa Trade Desk. She is a seasoned, client-focused, and results-oriented executive with 25-year plus track record on management, mobilizing partners, teams, and stakeholders with often competing interests to solve problems and achieve results for clients and stakeholders. Susan has built a reputation and know-how in building team resiliency, leading consultations among diverse stakeholders with reference to agenda setting, delivering on new change, and project management. Susan is very involved in her community in Canada and Africa through various community development initiatives, which is a tremendous asset in outreach. And I should also say that Susan is from Ottawa, which is another asset. So Susan, welcome. one of the organizers of today. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
And Stanley Straughter is a specialist in international business development with nearly 40 years of experience in international development. He's lived and worked in several countries around the world. He has considerable experience working with bilateral and multilateral financial development entities, such as the World Bank, USAID, African Development Foundation, and the African Development Bank. He is an original member of the African Growth and Opportunity Coalition that Congress passed to promote trade and investment between the United States and African countries. He served as a senior advisor and worked directly with the late Reverend Leon H. Sullivan, founder and chairman of OIC International and the International Foundation for Education and Self-Help. Stanley, welcome. Sorry, Stanley, if you can just turn on your microphone. I'm not sure if we can hear you. Oh, I still can't hear you, Stanley. If you can just unmute yourself. Yeah, great.
Hello?
Now that's great. Yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're sounding Philly strong. You're sounding Philly strong. Okay. All right. Thanks so much. So Susan, let me begin with you. And the question is this: what does African liberation mean in the era of COVID-19 and global climate change? What does it mean to you?
Well, Adrian, I thought from Ottawa you're gonna ease me into it a little bit, but global COVID-19 has been and continues to be an equalizer. Just like Dr. Garvey has said, looking at only the health component of it, COVID-19 has brought everybody, big and small, young and old, to a standstill. The world, I think Mother Nature breathed a sigh of relief because, we all had to stop. So COVID-19 gives us an opportunity, especially in the context of Africa. I'm gonna just start with the easy picking because Dr. Garvey has already laid out the track and I can smoothly sail on it. We have African governments and African officials that have never invested or have not invested in the health infrastructure of the countries. When they get sick or their family members get sick, they jump on the planes, even to give birth, they jump on the planes and they go somewhere else around the world to have their babies. The average African cannot do that. Now, come COVID-19 and they, as all of the other people on the continent, cannot fly out. I'm gonna pick on Uganda because I know Uganda and I know the National Referral Hospital of Mulago Hospital. I would have loved, maybe not literally, but I would have loved to be a fly on the wall at Mulago Referral Hospital when one of the elite politicians that have never stepped there got sick and they have to go there. So what this means is that both ourselves as Africans and also our governments, we have to really look, like it said, nobody's going to come and help us. When everybody closed down their borders, you could not come in with a private plane or with whatever. So we need to self-reflect and look after ourselves, look after our continent, look after our people, and look after our own environments. Because, as all the young folks we have on the panel and also in our audience will testify, this is the one world that we have. We are connected, but we are also responsible for what we do locally. So I don't know, I think that's a good way to start.
Stanley, what about you? You are someone who spent your life in finance. You've spent your life developing community economic projects. What does African liberation mean at this moment in history to you?
I think based upon my work with Reverend Sullivan and other great leaders that I had the honor of working with, we have created over the last 40, 50 years, despite all of the many different difficulties, but we have created international systems, international finance institutions that historically had not had the benefit of operating on the continent of Africa for a number of reasons. But now we see that the Africans themselves have created the phenomenal financial institutions. We have central bank governors that are equal to any in the world. We have countries like South Africa that has the 12th or 13th largest stock market in the world. So the expertise along with the resources is being evolving now. We're also working to change some of the historical inequities within these international institutions, where now when the African central bankers go to the World Bank, they can go with a heavy hand to discuss more appropriate relationships. They don't have to get dictated to anymore with some of the historical impediments to finance and foreign direct investment going into their respective countries. So we are now on the precipice of this, I guess, this century of Africa, where the expertise embodied in the human capital on the continent, as well as the international financing institutions and U.S. The U.S. policy, as well as the African diaspora you mentioned earlier, Adrian, coming together. I mean, Africans in the United States, or the African diaspora, remit over $60 billion a year to the African continent. I mean, that's like 100 times more than any aid that's given to the continent. And this is also information, this is also data that the World Bank has put together for us. I remember Mel and I worked on a project with them years ago. So I think from my perspective, many things are laying bare with you wonderful young people in this dynamic next generation and beyond, Dr. Garvey. I think they're going to pick up and do more than we've ever done. But the institutional framework is there. The international financial institutions are there. And more importantly, we have, I think Susan just mentioned the difficulty with some African countries investing in their own countries. You have a pension fund in Nigeria that's about $28 billion a year. And these guys invest in that pension fund in Europe and the United States. What about investment strategies to invest on the continent of Africa with their own pension funds and resources? So a combination of things that are coming together. They're not all there together. And of course, just as we're fighting systemic racism here in the United States, we also have the global white supremacies that are preventing this from happening. So it's not going to be an easy step for us working together to bring it all home for Africa and also for Africans living in the diaspora. But I think it's a wonderful first step. I think we have some more refining of institutions to do. We have some, one of the things that Dr. Garvey mentioned, we have to change our minds. I mean, they've taught us not to believe that Black people can do anything. And we believe it. You know, we go get on a plane and see a Black person flying a plane and say, oh man, it's going to be safe. You know, that's how fundamental the discussion has been. But we, and wonderful young people here will be able to help change that around. We have to change the history books. We're fighting our young children in Philadelphia right now, fighting that you go to school for high school and primary school and the college, and all the way up to a PhD, and never learn anything about Black people other than a paragraph that they were slaves. So all these things, and you guys are mentioning, I'm just restating some of the things that you are discussing here, but all of this stuff goes into a package. And while we all may not work on one thing at the same time, we have such great intellectual capital that we can disperse and work together on many things, from healthcare to finance. The expertise is just phenomenal, and I see all of you working on those everywhere. So I'm honored to be here as an OG and help to facilitate whatever I need, whatever I can do for this generation to get them not only to be engaged, but to be committed. Let me leave by saying this. I heard, even though Donald Trump mentioned that Africa and Haiti were shithole countries, he was talking to the African heads of states and said, I don't understand it. All my friends, when they go after they get rich. Why are y'all poor? And so there's a phenomenal misappropriation of our intellectual capital as well as a misunderstanding. We tend to continue to make Africa poor by the way we act and do these things ourselves. So I think it's here. Thank you for allowing me to participate, and look forward to the action of the North America diaspora movement with Canada and Philadelphia in the lead.
Stanley, you know, I have a little bit of gray hair right now, but I'm glad that you call me young. At least I think you're referring to me. So I appreciate it.
Okay.
Rashida, you are at the center of a sector that is really driving the global economy right now, a very, very dynamic sector. And I'm wondering, what does African liberation mean from your vantage point?
So thank you very much to all the organizers, and I'm really thankful to be. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And so I'm just really thankful for the opportunity to be on this distinguished panel. I think for me, it really has to do with control and access to resources. Black liberation isn't going to be possible. I mean, obviously we have the ideas, we have the culture, we have, you know, if you dig far enough, a lot of the inventions and a lot of the, you know, the popular culture that is throughout the world has been started or created by Black people in some way or form. But I think the challenge is that sometimes we don't have the pathway to either monetize that or understand how to control and benefit from what we create. And I think that continues to be an issue. So for me personally, I think that Black liberation would include us being able to control and our narrative, our access to resources, and our own investments for our own community.
Mm-hmm. And how do you, if I can just follow up, Rashida, how do you envision your relationship as an African American with the continent? What do you see as being that relationship between the diaspora and the African continent at this moment?
It's funny that you asked me that, because I have actually a similar story to you, in that my parents owned a jazz club, and in the Virgin Islands, where I'm actually from. And they had a bunch of different people from South Africa that would come and play, and from all over the world, but including South Africa, and were very involved in the anti-apartheid movement in the 80s. And that's how I grew up as a kid. And I had no idea where South Africa really was. I mean, I knew it was in Africa, but that stayed with me really throughout my entire life in terms of being connected with people that look like me. And it was very simplistic. Like, I didn't know all of the ins and outs, but I was told as a kid that you are African and this is where you're from, and the struggle that anyone that looks like you is going through should affect you, and you should care about it. It was really, that basic. And that really has stayed with me, and is part of the reason why I work in sort of this intersection between, the Caribbean, Africa, African American. It is very challenging at times, because the reality is that everyone has their own experience, and that Black people are not monolithic. And so sometimes you go to an event and you're thinking that you're going to be welcome, with open arms. And it's like, oh, well, I had this experience when I came to the US and I was da-da-da-da-da. You're like, let me unpack that, and let me start the healing process. And, I think that I'm continually learning about other self-identity, and I continue to learn about, I continue to understand that those that are closest to the problem are normally the ones with the solution. And I try and defer to that even when I think I may know something.
Moses, if I can kind of bring you in here, you have launched a very ambitious project. Starting, working in media as I do, I know how difficult it must be to start a communications company, a media company like your own. What does African liberation mean to you within your own media context?
Thank you, Adrian. And, my journey concerning the media also started in Ottawa, because I arrived in Canada as a young person, enrolled at Carleton University. And what I actually saw on the media, television, print, was really very bad, not good. So I decided actually to start the company, Silver Trust Media. And eventually, of course, I met my wife, Patricia, who is from Nigeria, and my dad's actually from Uganda, and my mom from South Sudan. So, and with my wife from Nigeria and my best friends from Jamaica, from Trinidad, from America, and so on. So it really helped to enlarge my understanding of what needs to be done. So the brief answer to that question is that African liberation really means unity. It also means economic empowerment. And that's why I really would like to appreciate even Susan Namlindwa, whose focus is really business, so that, the economy of Africa can grow. And then, in the diaspora also businesses can actually do very well. And it also really means unity and the ability for us to know ourselves better and appreciate one another. I want to actually take this opportunity to specifically actually appreciate, Janine. I had actually traveled to Nigeria, and I happened to meet her with my wife actually at the airport. Little did I know that I would actually be able to meet her today on a Zoom call such as this. But really, the most important trigger for the progress that I have made so far is actually Dr. Julius Garvey. I believe it was actually in 2013, thereabout, when I received a phone call from him. The phone in our studio rang, and it was actually him on the other side. And he said that he had actually come from Brazil, where, as you may all know, there's a population of about 80 million people of African descent in Brazil. And at the time, they were actually trying to look into doing some instrumental things, for the Black community actually over there to empower them, to show some success stories and that sort of thing. And he said that the first person who came to his mind was me, about assisting those guys, in doing something, setting up, creating content and things like that. So since that time, of course, we were already actually on the journey to launch a 24-hour television network. Eventually, we were, in 2016, we actually went live on Rogers Cable, Bell, and recently we expanded also to Eastlink and TELUS. We're in negotiation right now with a couple of other platforms as well. And yesterday, we were actually in a conversation with an executive who actually sends broadcasting signals actually to the US. So we are looking at the possibility of expanding to the United States, as well. And we've had some discussions, with a number of other entities too, including Flow, in the Caribbean, and Digicel and so on. So we want to actually have the network there also.
So
if
Moses,
you watch our channel,
Moses, so if
yeah.
I can ask you, so when you reference that term unity, it sounds as if you mean you're trying to intentionally be a bridge. Is that what it is? That you're trying to build in a very, very kind of systematic way networks.
Yes. That is actually precisely the point, because one of the things that Dr. Garvey actually mentioned to me is that his father was basically seen as a Messiah, right? And of course also as more like Moses, who took the children of Israel from Egypt back to the Promised Land, right? Mosiah Garvey actually, told all of us, from that time that we need to be able to liberate our minds. And even if we can't go back to the continent of Africa physically, we need to actually be able to get ourselves there mentally as well. And you cannot do that without education. You cannot do that without communication or media. So, it really means that media or communication and education, they are incredibly significant, markers of what it is that we can use to move our communities, forward. It was quite interesting at the time when he said that, look, my father was actually considered a Moses for, liberating the diaspora, so to speak. And your name happens to be actually Moses. And he asked actually if I could consider changing my last name to Garvey, so that I could actually effectively help to, to continue his father's legacy. And I've actually said, yes, I just need to convince my kids and all that they should actually carry the Garvey name. So it is actually quite interesting in that sense. But in all seriousness, I am completely honored to be with all of you, because I believe this conversation today, with the limited time, we may not be able to achieve much. But going forward, I think we can actually continue the conversation. Two quick things. I know the time is limited, but I just want to actually mention this. We are in the process of significantly scaling up our television, operations. And we actually, on Canada Day, which was July 1st, we presented a proposal to the Prime Minister of Canada. And just yesterday, I received a letter actually from the Prime Minister's office. We've actually had opportunity to have some serious conversations with the Chief of Staff to the Ministry of Canadian Heritage, the lead persons in charge of broadcasting and so on, to make our channel easily accessible. In essence, more like the Aboriginal People's Television Network, the Indigenous people. And our intention is, especially with all of you here, Rashida, Dr. Garvey, and our elders, Honorable Slaughter and Melvin and Janine, and in fact, everyone, to see what it is that we can do to actually do the same thing in the US also. Because for a long time, we've actually been seeing even networks like BET, the content is actually, for the most part, brings us down rather than elevating us. There are some good things, yes, but we are very intentional with what we are doing. And I was actually quite pleased as a number of, I think about 2 years ago when I received a message from the Jamaican Stock Exchange
to say that why don't you actually bring, the Afro Global Corporation and list it on the stock exchange over here, so that we can actually raise capital in order actually to make these actually a huge thing and all of that.
Okay.
We've had some conversations with Dr. Garvey as well, and I think in the next little while, we'll be able to crystallize some of these ideas and ensure that we're able to do much more, which will actually drive health, education, business, and all of that as well.
Thanks so much, Moses. Stanley, Moses just mentioned capital, and I was curious as to what you regard as being some of the opportunities for trade and also cultural exchanges between continental Africa and the diaspora. And if you could also provide some examples of inspiring, economic or social enterprises, initiatives that are happening on the continent right now.
We are fortunate in that there is currently a movement in the United States with investment banks and pension funds. In the city of Philadelphia, we have a treasurer. His name is Christian Dunbar, and Christian is the treasurer of the city of Philadelphia, and they've organized an initiative, mostly with fund managers of pension funds and whatnot across the United States, and they have about $500 billion that they've been on the continent of Africa looking at investments. They're building roads and infrastructure. It's focused on infrastructure. So that's just one example of how our diaspora here can work with Africa and African countries doing major types of projects. They're in Cote d'Ivoire, they're in Kenya, they're in various other places. The other thing I want to point out is I'm also the chairman of the African Caribbean Business Council of Greater Philadelphia. And every year founded in 2006, and each year we continue to do trade missions. We have advocacy with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We bring our African and Caribbean ambassadors to Philadelphia, not to Pittsburgh, but to Harrisburg, to the farm show where we can have our organization see and farm, and also look at the best expertise available where they may collaborate with intellectual capital. And so we have work to do, but I can see and very optimistic about the movement going forward. We also had an opportunity, and we're working with now, Janine might talk about this a little more. We work with the African Development Bank to have passed legislation in the United States Congress and also in about 34 states across the United States to have those pension funds, retirement funds, teacher funds, to buy ADB securities. And I know that they're still going on. That was a great opportunity that we were able to educate people to this bank, this institution called the African Development Bank. And I mentioned Janine because I know she's also working with, Janine is former past work for the African Development Bank, but she's also representing the African Finance Corporation Conference now, which is another institutional base that's there that we can continue to learn about and work with more. So I think the foundation is there. We have to do more. For instance, we're talking about education, but you can go to college and never get a course in African economics. I mean, you tell me when you go to Harvard, you can go to the best of them or the worst of them. I guess the best thing we have going for us is some HBCUs like Lincoln University that taught the great Kwame Nkrumah and Zikwe. But where do we go to learn about economics? That course has not been written yet, and that's a contribution that I'm hopeful that many of you young people will help. So just like you can go to get a degree in European economics, you can go to get a degree in economics of Africa. I mean, you have to remember that the founding, what all this brought together is we were the economics of the world for this period. We meaning people, African people. We created the economic standard. We built the wealth, and nobody's written a book about that other than for us to consistently recognize the slave trade, but what did we create and how did we help create the economies of the Western world? This is the work we have to do. So I'm looking forward to some of the young people writing their thesis on that as you go forward.
Thanks, Stanley. Susan, perhaps I can ask you, what do you see as being some trade opportunities?
Now, when we think about trade opportunities, Africa is ripe. I constantly tell my friends and my foes that you could go to Africa and sell, if you're selling safety pins and you're selling a good safety pin and you're consistent and trustworthy, you will make a killing. Africa is a dynamic, when you talk about population growth, when you talk about just the sheer numbers and how we are, the age of the continent. When you talk about like mobile phones and mobile access right now, Africa is ripe. Africa is, what is it that you're selling as a business? Are you building homes? Every sector in Africa is open for ethical business partners. I can't think about what you're doing. We'll talk about education. There's room for education. Online education, people have mobile phones they can learn. Are we talking about telehealth? Are we talking about just basic housing? If you even just looked at the Millennium Development Goals and just picked one and built a business around that in Africa, there's opportunities ripe for every business, and we are here. And what I find and my hope from these kinds of conversations is that if I look around the panel, we have the whole continent covered. And when I say the whole continent covered, is that we have people in the diaspora that know their communities. So if I'm talking about East Africa, or I'm talking about my own field, I'll talk about housing, I'll talk about health, I'll talk about education. Bring me an opportunity, bring me a company that is ready to do that right now, and I can find a partnering company. What I think is not that their opportunities are not there, but we have not highlighted those opportunities. And we have this culture of fear, like everybody has alluded. People look at Africa and they think it's one big continent and we are one big dark place where there's, all kinds of stories in people's heads. It's dark, it doesn't rain, whatever. But this is the job of us in the diaspora right now, and all Africa lovers. Listen, put your hand up and say, hey, I'm from Uganda. No, we don't sleep on trees. We can actually buy stuff. And as Africans also, we have to be telling our story. And this is where my brother Moses, I have a son called Moses, a brother Moses, and he's from Uganda. So we are connected. And he started in Ottawa. So this is where we partner with Moses and everybody else on here, and we just have to highlight the opportunities and make that connection that is not, when you want to do business in Africa, you don't pick up the phone and say, I want to order this. You have to sit down and play with the babies. We are a relational kind of business. It's not transactional, so you have to build a relationship. And this is where the diaspora can come in. Talk about where I come from. Post some pictures of those bananas and those oranges that you wanted, and the mangoes. And have the people fall in love with each other, and then we can do business.
Rashida, I want to thank you very much, Susan. Rashida, I wanted to ask you this question, because we know that in the 21st century, the internet really is the world's highway. And at the moment, and Susan had alluded to this in the chat room, she'd mentioned that just 22% of Africans are currently online. What do you see as being the diaspora's role in helping to bring, the 78% of Africans who are not currently on that highway online?
That's an interesting question, and it's a little bit of a challenge too. I think that Dr. Garvey had mentioned something about scale. And I think that in terms of, if you look at a lot of the successful tech companies or the tech solutions that have come out in the last, say, decade, most of those individuals met each other in university. If you look at like Stanford, Harvard, if you like scratch a little bit beyond the surface about a lot of these tech companies, most of them were either started in university or, they met each other in university. To Susan's point about like the relationship, I do think going back to Stanley's point about HBCUs is a really, really important part.
Historically black colleges in the state.
Colleges and universities, I'm sorry, with the acronyms. So like Spelman, Morehouse, Lincoln University, et cetera. There are a number of them throughout the United States. And I think that making those links between historically Black universities and colleges and educational institutions on the continent and through the Caribbean is actually the one place that there could be sort of the trajectory of these solutions that will actually be developed by these young people that will get to scale and get to market quicker is going to come from. So we need to invest in those universities and that relationship, because those universities have a ton, historically, they have a ton of relationships with the continent through, either connections with land grants or research, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that I'm practical as well and try and think of, how can you reach the most amount of people the quickest way. And I think in terms of trying to bring on new solutions, my number one thing is really to look at like, how can you reach these young people, get them into, either cooperatives or collaboratives, or getting them to work on ideas together. They have the solutions. They don't have the connections, the access, and sometimes the capital. And I think our job is then to follow up with like, oh, that's great. That's kind of taken off. Let's put in the capital and see that develop and grow. So although I do have a tech company, I think that that's probably the best way to get some of these new technologies up and running.
Thanks, Rashida. We're rapidly running out of time for this panel, but I did want to pose this question, and I wanted both Stanley and Moses to try to address it. What does Africa for the Africans mean in 2020 at a time when countries like China are establishing a significant foothold on the continent? Does China's current engagement with the African continent represent a grave threat to sovereignty and imperil political and economic independence? Or does it provide a historic opportunity for the construction of vital infrastructure and unprecedented economic growth? So perhaps Stanley, you can start, and then Moses next.
Okay, thank you. I have to admit that my early education on this came from the great Marcus Garvey. So Julius, you can clean me up if I misstate, but the idea historically has been that people of African descent around the world come together. And I don't think there's been anybody on the planet that has done even close to what the great Marcus Garvey has done in organizing some 11 million people of African descent to focus on Africa as a destination point for where they come from. But in contemporary times, I think it's equally important, and I would advise everybody to get a chance to read or listen to Julius on one of his time, to talk about this notion of China, the Afrocentric view of the world, and the historic, and we may be witnessing the decline of global white supremacy. And so I always say, I'm learning, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And this is an opportunity for people of African descent around the world to come, to step up to participate in the realignment of the world leadership. Julius mentioned the Berlin Agreement. Well, this transition is not going to be the same anymore. And where are we as people of African descent in this realignment? Even right now, many of our African and Caribbean leaders at the United Nations are dealing with this global alliance by saying, no longer we can have a Security Council and don't have a permanent African or Caribbean member of the Security Council. Or even the World Bank we talked about earlier, these international institutions, we don't have Africans on them controlling and making policy. And this is the transition that we'll be making. And so the question of Africa, for us at home and abroad, it also has a lot to do with, I think Ambassador Eric Connor said, like Africa is born in us, and we have to recognize that so that we can sit at the table, understand what this next transition in global power will be, and how we need to prepare you young people and your youth to sit at the table of global governance. And that will dictate how the great stuff that we've been talking about here will be scaled up, as Rashida just said, and move quicker to a higher level so that we can enhance the quality of life for all people on the planet, but mostly people of African descent who has been historically left behind intentionally. So global governance is the issue that we have to deal with as we're dealing with the economics part. And we're going to have to sit down and send some of you up to the UN to help do this kind of education also. So that's my thought on that.
Moses, final word to you.
I believe that Africa's China problem can be solved by using two things. The first one is, of course, leadership throughout the continent that should be a lot more cognizant of the challenges and opportunities that Africa, faces as a result of the China, interest in regards to the continent. And the second one is actually really the power of the diaspora. There are so many efforts that are being put forward, including the CFA and so many others, including the 6th region, of the African Union that has been actually constituted as well. But I think a more effective African Diaspora Council has to be actually set up. And that African Diaspora Council actually has to have people who are really, really interested in the progress and prosperity of the continent, which will, in essence, also positively actually advance the diaspora. So I think this is really the most important thing that needs to be done, because at the end of the day, Africa has more of what the world needs than, the world having more of what Africa needs. So if we can really look at that, specifically, I think it will move us further. The second point is that, earlier I mentioned the point about unity. I've had so many conversations about individuals and all of that. I believe there is a sense of identity crisis for us as people of African descent. We need to be able to see ourselves really as one. So if you're from the Caribbean, whether from Jamaica or Trinidad or any such other place, or from the continent, you're Kenyan, Tanzanian, and, Rwandese, etc. We need to actually really, see that sense of unity, which I think will be instrumental because there's a strength in unity. And that's really, I think, the most significant thing that needs to be looked at in order to actually counter the threats or the opportunities, that, even China actually offers. We also need to be able to name our price because, there have been conversations already about the importance of doing things rather differently in regards to, establishing perhaps, a common currency or a central bank for the entire continent of Africa and some of those other entities. So a lot needs to be done, but my personal pledge, to this panel is that I will do everything possible to assist with the branding of Africa and the branding of the diaspora as well. Because we are really sick and tired of the negative images and all of that. There's one major international organization that some time back approached us with money to say that, look, we want to advertise on your network, we want to do this and that. We had to tell them no, because they actually provided us with terrible images and all of that. And they say that these are the images that will work for us to be able to raise money for charity in Africa. So we have to really flip everything really upside down and look at it, in a fresh way. And that's why I think even young voices that in our midst should also be taken seriously. Earlier on, Chine actually said that my culture is my motivation. My culture is my motivation. What is your motivation? If it is your culture, what is your culture? Your culture is your history and it is your heritage, and you need to really take that and embrace it and run with it. Thank you very much.
Well, Moses, thank you very much. And on that uplifting note, that brings us to the end of this panel. So I'd like to thank Rashida, I'd like to thank Susan, I'd like to thank Stanley and Moses for a very vibrant, vital panel. Thank you very much. I'm going to give you a
thank you.
Thank you.
Clap to you folks. Thank you. We're now going to move on to our respondents. And our first respondent is Fabiola Dieudonné. Fabiola has an honors degree in communications from the University of Ottawa. She has a decade of professional experience in digital communication, including work at the International Development and Research Centre, also known as IDRC. Her current leadership position at the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, she's currently in a leadership position at the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. Outside of her day job, she serves as the Director of Communications for a local mental health awareness organization and provides her expertise to private entities through her company, Sussex New Media. Fabiola, welcome. And our second respondent is Camille Olufowobi. Camille is a true embodiment of thinking globally and acting locally. He's lived, schooled, worked, and visited 30 countries on 5 continents. He generally considers himself to be a global citizen with a passion for Africa. He's the CEO of Most Influential People of African Descent, or MIPAD, and founder of My Roots in Africa Tree Planting Initiative. MIPAD is a global civil society organization tasked with identifying influential people of African descent worldwide in support of the United Nations International Decade for People of African Descent. Welcome, Camille and Fabiola. Yeah,
Thank you for having us.
Fabiola, perhaps you can start with your response.
Sure. I'm sorry. So actually, like, the audio cut off for a few seconds. If you don't mind repeating the question.
Oh, well, I was going to say, just in terms of your response to what you've heard so far as today's respondent. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, first off, I would like to thank everyone for being part of this webinar, to be, like, surrounded by so many accomplished people. So I think, like, my thoughts on this and collaboration between the diaspora and Africa is that, with having a background in international development, I've seen firsthand what collaboration can do. First of all, like, it generates so much knowledge, and knowledge that can be that can be scaled up to the point where you can actually have, like, meaningful impact in the lives of many people. And the thing I know, like, Rashida has mentioned this before, is that local problems are best solved by the locals, and I feel like that is very true. But at the same time, I feel like the role that diaspora has is to give the financial, like, independence that the local people need in order to actually, like, elevate and empower themselves. And also, like, the diaspora has also, like, the technical expertise and education, but at the same time, the local people, like in Africa, they have that like that contextual knowledge on how to invest and on how the economy there works. Basically, if we can bring those two things together and work in collaboration, I think that can really, like, elevate the continent as a whole. And I think, like, one final thought I have on this as, like, the diaspora is that we need to bring to the continent non-exploitive opportunities as well, because then it's like, then we can really truly make Africa, like, autonomous from always being independent of the need of others.
What does that mean when you say non-exploitative?
Because, like, at the moment, I really feel like people do want to do business in Africa, but I feel like at the same time, they don't have Africa's best interests at heart, versus the diaspora really does. We really want to elevate, we want to educate, we want to, like, to have that autonomy that everybody else seems to have. So to bring those opportunities when someone truly wants to work with you, really wants to elevate you, those are the type of opportunities that we should be looking at, because not everybody always has our best interests. That's what I mean by that.
Camille, you're
yes, Adrian.
How are you?
Not bad at all. Good to be here.
Good. So your response, Camille, to what you've heard. So
Well, my response would take from where you started your story, and I take from that next time my children are in the shop, I'll tell them to put that down. We don't buy American products, until the fall of a racist government or the racist environment, a society in America. If we could boycott South Africa for apartheid, what stops us as Black people boycotting American products and get those products? If Black people in the diaspora need products, let's manufacture them in Africa and get them on the Black Star line and ship them to the diaspora. This is the line of thinking where we need to be. But let me just step back a bit. I just really love that story of yours, and I think we can all adopt that. Don't buy, anything American until we get some tangible transformation in the American polity. This is Camille again. My life work is the unification of people of African descent from all over the world, sometimes in unexpected places. And I'm doing this as a mandate for the United Nations as part of the International Decade. It's truly been a privilege to listen to all of you, to be here with the Foreign Minister, with Susan, Mr. Foote, I love you. Rashida is one of my Padians who we've honored. It's truly an honor to actually be here. Moses, fantastic work that you're doing, in Canada. I think the point I wanted to just jump on very quickly is about China. There was a comment about the imperial powers in Africa. For those who are in trade or investment, there's a term we use called 8713. When you look at the rails of trade in Africa, 87% of those rails are built, for trade outside of Africa, while intra-Africa trade is only about 13. And this is historical from colonialism, because the rails of trade were built outwards, meaning to get the natural resources out of Africa. The focus for us as the next generation is to focus on keeping that trade in Africa. Intra-Africa trade is so important for us. Therefore, anyone, China, the Europeans, Russia, anyone coming into Africa, if the rails of trade are pointing outwards, that's when it's in opposition to what we should stand for. As long as the rails are pointing inward, allows us to build economic wealth. And the diaspora, has a great role. I mean, $1.2 trillion, the richest Black people in the world are Black Americans. If we can combine those two things together, meaning Africa and that Black economy in the diaspora, I think we would be formidable. So for me, this is very personal, because growing up in America, the Americans will call me African, and then when I'm on the continent, the continental Africans will call me American. So my entire life, I've had this dichotomy of these two sides of me that never really understood each other. But the one thing that binds us is Africa, and we need to fight for the economic liberation of our people. Dr. Garvey, I love you. Thank you for being here.
Camille, maybe I can just follow up because you alluded to China there. And I was curious as to your own assessment of the way in which China is engaging with the continent, because there is an argument to be made that China has contributed mightily to the development of infrastructure in different parts of the continent. There could be an argument to be made that China, unlike other previous powers, is not engaging in maybe the level of political interference that other investors,
right. I mean, that's the only thing that's different.
So how do you assess the way in which China is engaging with Africa at this moment?
It's no different from everybody else. Like I said, if you listen to what I said about the rails of trade, the infrastructure that China is building in Africa is to get the natural resources out of Africa, not to keep it in. This is my singular point for every imperial power in Africa, is the rails of trade must be to benefit Africa. That is Africans for Africans. If you want to participate, you want to trade with us, the rails should not be pointing outwards. So China's approach, yes, they stay out of our political, issues. They spy on us by donating the African Union building to us. but they're no different. Everybody else wants to exploit Africa. That is why I'm saying, for the purpose of this conversation, Blacks around the world, in Canada, Nova Scotia, to the Americas, to Brazil, right, to Pakistan, to where we exist, we need to trade with Africa, with ourselves. This is the paramount mission for our generation, the economic liberation of our people. And let me say this. We have two very interesting things I observed from this conversation. We need to connect the dots. Dr. Garvey is here. We have the foreign minister of Togo here. And through my, love of Garvey, I learned that Garvey never visited Africa. So my project I run for the most influential is called the My Roots in Africa project. What stops us from connecting the dots? Let us begin a process of reconnecting those in the diaspora back to the continent by planting a tree dedicated to Marcus Garvey in Togo, right? As a symbol of his roots planted on the continent of Africa, and get more of us to do that, to start those umbilical cords that were severed, to reconnect them. So a simple exercise we could do just amongst us here is to push, for what you mentioned earlier, boycott American products. If we could do that to South Africa, why can't we do that to America? For us to reconnect, with the continent, let Togo honor Marcus Garvey by planting or dedicating a tree, saying that this is a symbol of his roots in Africa, and we want more people in the diaspora to come and trade with us, right? Susan is here. You're talking about trade. We need to reconnect and build economic wealth together.
Fabiola, maybe I can ask you this question. How do you imagine your generation reconnecting these dots, restitching this network, this global diaspora? And what are some concrete ways in which you think that can be done?
Well, I'll begin with our generation. I feel like we are very interconnected. Everything is very instant. So I feel like nowadays, it's like when we talk about collaboration, we do not need to be in the same country or in the same room to come together and discuss the issues that we find important, like we are doing today. So with the help of the technology that we have today, connection with Africa can happen almost instantaneously. So we can do that at any point. So this is when we need to find those people so we can then create those different clusters. Because if we have access to Dr. Garvey, who knows maybe somebody else in a different trade, we can then create those different types of clusters that connects everyone to somebody. We just need to start off with that one connection, and from there our network can really grow. And the day that everything is so connected, we just need to sit down and actually create the foundation and how those networks are going to work, so we can really work together. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Camille, we have this response to something that you said. It's by Ismira Etch, and Camille wrote, "Buy Black American. Please disaggregate and exclude Black American businesses from your boycott."
Absolutely.
We here are already strongly divested from the government that holds us under siege. Please make this distinction.
Absolutely. We will trade with each other. That's the point. We boycott white America or anything American that is not Black. We trade with ourselves. Whatever Black people need in America, we manufacture it in Africa and ship it on the Black Star Line back to the Americas. This is us. This is a time for us to leverage this movement, this period to our advantage. And I want to say something really quickly about connectivity. One thing that Dr. Julius Garvey, the last time we were on a call together with the CDC, and the idea of brain drain from Africa, it's all about perspective. To your point, millions, billions of dollars comes from the diaspora into Africa via remittances, right? So the same way expertise can flow into Africa through global connectivity. So you look at telemedicine, for example. Some of the most educated doctors in the world are from Africa in the diaspora. And through telemedicine, we are supporting the CDC by, addressing the shortage of doctors in Africa. So we don't all have to be on the continent for us to support the continent, right? We don't all have to get on a boat to support Africa, right? So we can do this by transferring expertise of people of African descent back into Africa through technology, right? I took notes. I mean, Dr. Garvey said, if Garvey was alive, what would he be doing? I took notes on that. That's very important. Commerce. We need to capitalize on that. We don't necessarily need to all buy ships, but get into logistics, right? And use the internet to transfer expertise. So we need to work closer together. And that's why calls like these are very important.
This is the final question, and we're rapidly running out of time. But at the beginning of the 20th century, in his seminal text, Souls of Black Folk, W.B. Du Bois said that the problem of the 20th century was the problem of the color line. And I'm curious, from your vantage point, from your perspective, what do you see as being the challenge that African peoples face in the 21st century? Fabiola?
I think one of the challenges that we face is, I think I'm going to go back to just being like the African for Africa. I know we had received various words from Moses, but I really think what it means is it's the autonomy. I feel like Africa still has that issue of autonomy. I feel like we have so much aid coming from left and right that is becoming, I feel like sometimes it gets diluted. And Susan has mentioned that the COVID pandemic has really shown the leaders of the African countries that you need to invest in the different infrastructure and the health infrastructure in order to be able to help your country and your people. So I feel like nowadays the autonomy is currently one of the challenges that Africa still faces, because we tend to look elsewhere to find the solutions. And I really think that if the diaspora can really help connect, to connect the people in Africa to non-exploitive opportunities, to funding, to grant, to actually be able to elevate, empower themselves, could really start solving some of the issues that so many people are facing nowadays.
Just before Camille, intervenes, Marcus Garvey did say any leadership that depends upon another race is a leadership that will enslave you.
Yes, that's a very strong statement, and I agree. We need to be able to help ourselves first, and then we need to stop looking elsewhere for the answers. Just working in international development, I just see how innovative Africa can really be, and we just need to have the opportunity to scale up that knowledge and our innovations or invention in order to actually reach that level where we can actually have an economic return on all those investments that the country or the continent is actually capable of giving back to the world.
Okay. Camille, final word to you.
Yes, so our biggest problem as I see it is our inability to consolidate power. And power to me means that when we speak, let the world hear us and abide by what we're saying. You see, Togo, it's a privilege to have the foreign minister of Togo here. It is one of the smallest countries in the world, but it has in international affairs the power to sanction the United States, right? So imagine us being able to consolidate the economic buying power of people of African descent in the U.S., estimated at $1.2 trillion, and the sanction powers or the diplomatic powers of African nations and the African Union. Imagine us being able to combine that together, that the next time anywhere in the world a person of African descent is, killed by police brutality, we're able to consolidate and tell America never again, right? This is our biggest problem. And that for me is where we need to put a lot more focus. And power comes from economic might. So we need to work together and consolidate power. This is my final thought.
Camille, thank you very much. But Camille, I must correct you because you said that Togo is one of the smallest countries in the world. My family is from Antigua, and that's a title that we claim. Well, my mom is from Antigua, and Antigua has 80,000 people. 80,000 people. So we claim that title as being one of the smallest in the world, smallest countries in the world.
But small, but think about it, the power that it weighs, if we work together as a country, what we can do, it's incredible.
Camille,
so much love to everybody.
Camille and Fabiola, thank you so much for your fabulous contributions today. We really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you. And this almost
Thank you for having us.
This brings us almost to the end of our session today, but I would like Janine B. Scott, Chairwoman of the Constituency for Africa, to offer her closing remarks. Janine.
Thank you, Adrian, for your marvelous moderating today. And thank you to all of the panelists, to our partners, the Africa Trade Desk, and to Afro Global for really helping to make this day a success. I just wanted to conclude with a few words about CFA and about our forthcoming Ronald H. Brown series on African affairs. I think Mel has started out earlier by indicating that CFA, as you know, is a 30-plus-year-old organization that works principally to educate Americans in the diaspora about Africa, about the African policy issues here in the United States and abroad, and to really enable those of us within the diaspora and friends of Africa as well to have a voice within many of these policy-making fora that we engage in. Whether here in the United States, with the African Union, with multilateral institutions such as the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and others. Traditionally, we have about 6 or 7 different things that we do throughout the year, including our African Diplomatic Outreach Program, where we work on trade and investment and other policy matters with African diplomats. We work with young people through our Young Leaders Summit that we do on the fringes of the Mandela Yali Africa program. We have a communications program. We have stakeholder meetings that we hold throughout the country with leaders that we tend to think of the universe being in Washington, D.C. sometimes, and we want to make sure that those of us who have voice or want to have voice in policy affairs matters throughout the United States and elsewhere are included in this dialogue. We have our town hall meetings as well, sector working groups. We work on health issues, trade and investment. And our signature piece is what we call the Ronald H. Brown series on African affairs. It's done every September alongside the Congressional Black Caucus annual legislative conference that they have. And as you know, Secretary Brown was the first African American who was named as the Secretary of Commerce in the United States, and it is named after him. And he was tragically killed in a plane crash in 1996 when he was on one of the trade missions that we have. But the series itself serves as a platform for linking members of the Congressional Black Caucus with Africa-focused organizations and members of the African Diplomatic Corps and other key policymakers. We have convened over the years, I'd say more than 200 workshops and forums and other initiatives to really work on both gleaning information in and pushing information out to the community around many of these issues. At the end of our series every year, we put together a report. It has a series of recommendations that we make both to US government entities as well as to many of the multilateral entities with whom we engage. This year, we will have 5 different roundtables. It will be virtual this year as opposed to having it here in Washington, D.C. But we will focus on health and healthcare infrastructure, empowering the next generation, return Black Peace Corps volunteers, and there will also be one on trade and investment. But importantly, and this particular conversation today is a feeder for what we'd like to do as North American Diaspora Engaging to Transform Africa's Future. And we'd like to build on the discussion that we've had today and take it to the next phase in September. We hope to convene that session with a representation from an African head of state. We've invited a couple of them to come and join us, along with major leaders from some of the premier institutions in Africa as well as around the US to lead us in those discussions. It's really our conviction that working together with our partners from Canada in particular and coming together as a united North American front, that we will be able to make a difference with our collective thinking. Again, let me thank all of our partners today. We look forward to continuing this dialogue, to having this engagement going forward in September, and to building it into something that goes even farther beyond. Thank you.
Thank you.